Hey guys, it's Daniel. In this documentary, I'm going to be taking a look at the history of Man in the Box, not just in terms of the production of the song, but also in terms of the bigger picture, the bigger scale, how that song had such a significant impact on the band in so many different ways. It was the band's first big hit in 1991, and it really blew the doors wide open for them. Prior to that, they were, somewhat successful, but really it was Man in the Box that started their career. And it was also Man in the Box, which kind of started the beginning of the end of their career. So it's generally believed that Layne Staley's addiction to heroin, his first dabbling in that drug, started on the Van Halen tour at some point in 1991 or 92, probably 91. And the reason the band got that tour, the biggest reason, was Man in the Box. I'll be talking about that and much more in this video. So when I say I'll be exploring the history of that song, it really is a bigger picture scale in addition to the specific details of how the song was made. If you guys like what you see, make sure to subscribe for more. Everything on this channel is 100% original. I'm the one putting all the videos together. Thank you for your time.
Man in the Box is Alice in Chains' biggest hit. However, the song was not expected to be such a big success. It was released as the second single from the band's debut record Facelift in January of 1991. And quickly became a surprise hit. According to Jerry Cantrell, Alice in Chains' record label Columbia was not initially impressed by the song. As a matter of fact, according to Jerry, Columbia was even considering leaving Man in the Box off the album entirely, let alone releasing it as a single. However, after the band's insistence, the song was included on Facelift. The success of Man in the Box was life-changing for Alice in Chains. The following is from Jerry Cantrell, where he discusses the success of the song and a funny story involving two homeless guys in New York City. This is from Grunge is Dead. Quote, Man in the Box hit and everything changed. When that song hit, we sold 500,000 records. Before that, I think we toured for 8 months and sold 40,000 records. Then the song hit and boom, there it went. As far as Man in the Box goes, I've had conversations with the record company about this, and everybody conveniently forgets that nobody really liked that song. They thought it was too slow. There was some discussion about it maybe not being on the record, and we're like, screw that. That song is killer. I remember going to New York City. I went with Layne. I think coincidentally, it's the week I started smoking. Our album was on the cover of Billboard magazine. I think we were there to do a press thing. Me and Layne picked up a couple of homeless guys that were hanging out by our hotel. We got into a conversation with them, and we figured we're doing good. So, we invited them up to our suite. We had a killer room, so we ordered all this room service and booze and hung out with these two homeless dudes all night. And then, gave them train fare to go back to where they were going in the morning. End quote. The guys in Alice in Chains spent various periods of time homeless, and so perhaps they felt a sore spot for others in that situation. The band actually lived together at various points in times in different studios in Seattle, including the Music Bank and London Bridge Studios. London Bridge Studios in particular holds an important place in the story of Alice in Chains, as much of their work was recorded there, including Facelift. As a matter of fact, Facelift was recorded at 2 different studios, London Bridge in Seattle and El Dorado Studios in LA with producer Dave Jordan. One of Dave Jordan's most notable contributions to Man in the Box in particular was the voice box effect used at various points throughout the song. Dave came up with the idea of using a voice box when he was driving to the studio one day and heard Bon Jovi's song Living on a Prayer on the radio. Living on a Prayer, of course, heavily features a voice box. The following is from Dave Jordan. This is from Alice in Chains, The Untold Story. Quote, I think that voice box costs like $100, and that was the hook sound for Man in the Box. And to me, it made the whole difference in making it a hit record. I had them buy maybe $600 worth of stuff for a hit song that sold millions. I didn't tell them to go to the store and just start buying stuff. Anything else they bought after that, I don't know about it, and I had nothing to do with it. End quote. Another interesting aspect of Dave Jordan's production is that he actually slowed down the tempo of the song. The demo for the song is actually at a faster tempo than the final version on Facelift. Reflecting on this, Dave Jordan once said the following, quote, the mid-tempo, slow-tempo stuff just sounded heavier. Like Man in the Box sped up wouldn't have sounded right. I don't remember from the demo what I did, how much I slowed it down, but to me, even a beat per minute slower can make a big difference. End quote. Now, as mentioned earlier, the song initially was not expected to be a big hit, though there were some people who saw its potential, including Layne Staley's mother, Nancy McCallum. Quote, Layne called me one day after he'd given me Facelift and said, "So what do you think of the tape?" And I said, "I think there's a sleeper on that album, a song that was going to creep up on people. It's called Man in the Box." And he said, "Mom, I wrote that song." And I said, "Layne, it's so beautiful." But I didn't know he was the man in the box. I'm sure he just kept wanting me to get it. End quote. One of the themes of the song is about being under the control of others, being put in a box, so to speak. Reflecting on this, Jerry Cantrell once said the following, quote, "What it's basically about is how government and media control the public's perception of events in the world, and they build you into a box by feeding it to you in your home. And it's just about breaking out of that box and looking outside of that box that has been built for you." End quote. For his part, Layne Staley once said the following in 1991 to Much Music regarding the meaning behind the song. Quote, "It's kinda loosely based on media censorship, but only my theory, so it's not a fact of a statement." End quote. In 1992, Layne Staley said the following to Rolling Stone magazine regarding the meaning of the song. Quote, "I started writing about censorship. Around the same time, we went out for dinner with some Columbia Records people who were vegetarians. They told me how veal was made from calves raised in these small boxes, and that image stuck in my head. So I went home and wrote about government censorship and eating meat as seen through the eyes of a doomed calf." End quote. In keeping with the theme of animals, the music video for Man in the Box takes place on a farm and features various farm animals. The music video has an interesting backstory. The following is from Paul Rachman, the director of the video, where he explains the history behind the video. This is from an interview Paul Rachman did with journalist David Bronstein, which was published in 2011. Quote, "On Halloween of 1990, 2 months after Facelift had come out, I saw the band play at the Cat Club in New York City and they blew me away. I loved them. The next day, I called the video commissioner of Columbia Records. His name was Chris P. And I said I wanted to work with the band. They had just done a video called We Die Young, but that single didn't fly. In late November, a month later, they asked me to write for the Man in the Box video. The band was touring around that time with Iggy Pop. I received a few phone calls and fax exchanges with Layne. He had written the song, so I collaborated with him conceptually, but at a distance because they were touring. Layne's idea for the video and song were based on the images of a rainy, drippy barn and a baby with his eyes sewn shut. I took those ideas on board and came up with an animal farm, but used an adult for the eyes sewn shut idea. I remember for the animals there were a couple of horses, but production brought in the pigs, the cows, and the chickens. There had never been a rock music video with animals in them before. Layne was very, very magnetic and inspiring. It was very easy to visualize his ideas because there really was truth in them. I really feel that when you watch the video, that it matches the song, it added to it, and transcended what it needed to do to reach their audience and beyond. Columbia Records loved it, MTV loved it, the band loved it. It hit the Buzzbin rotation almost immediately. It just clicked. I remember Metallica saying that Man in the Box was their favorite video. In September of 1991, it got an MTV Award nomination. It ended up losing to an Aerosmith video, one of the ones with Alicia Silverstone in it. I remember sitting at the awards, and when they read who had won, it started with A. My heart skipped a beat, and then I heard Aerosmith. Anyways, our video was a 14-hour one-day shoot in December of 1990. The band were great to work with. They were young, fresh, and eager. There was only 1 or 2 full band setups, so most of the time when the video was being shot, we worked on individuals. When you watch the video, you can see their youth and vitality. Layne was beautiful in his close-ups. He is almost baby-faced, and his eyes are piercing. They were a young band with hope. They were touring but did not know their destiny yet. They were the type of band working hard because they wanted to make it. Nothing was guaranteed for them in the winter of 1990. No one knew what would happen with them. At the time of the shoot, they were a band that could have fallen flat out after 50 or 60,000 records sold or something. They were a fun rock band to hang out with, easy to be around. I could definitely notice the change when I would see them later in their careers. They had become rock stars by then. The sepia color of the video fit the mood. I actually shot in black and white film for Man in the Box. Before shooting, I visualized a black and white video with a little bit of color in the handheld 16mm shots in the cages outside. After, when I was in color correction, the sepia tint really gave the video a warmer but more intense feel. The band's heavy, grungy sound was dark in itself. The song and video have definite moods. I remember a few months after the video was completed, I was in Seattle directing the video for Temple of the Dog, which involved Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell. This was the first time Eddie Vedder had been filmed. I was hanging out with Layne one night, and I could tell that the rock star lifestyle was going to affect him. He was very sweet, talented, sensitive, and inwardly emotional. He was very confident and comfortable with his ideas and his art and music. He never really second-guessed himself. He was always forward-moving with his thoughts. I don't remember him as ever hesitant or asking too many questions. He just did it. On the set for Man in the Box, the band was very cooperative. I mean, look at the video. I asked the frontman to sing while tied up and sitting in the corner of a really dirty barn. To most frontmen, that would seem demeaning and negative. But Layne just did it, and you could see he is in that moment. There is almost a vulnerable sadness in his eyes and face in that scene. I was psyched and very satisfied. I was able to really bring the element of mood into the music video, which was always what I was trying to do. I felt I had really achieved that with Man in the Box. First and foremost, it was a great song and a great band that inspired me. I mean, I saw the band live first, and then I went after that video as a director because I felt something about the music. In the end, its success was the ultimate reward, but the making and working on it was very, very satisfying. Man in the Box put me in a different league vis-a-vis the record companies and the music biz too. It still stands up well today." End quote. The following is another quote from director Paul Rachman on the story behind the Man in the Box video. This is from Alice in Chains' The Untold Story. Quote, "The band loved the video. We made a couple of adjustments, like we added a couple of close-ups of Layne and made sure the whole band was evenly represented, and that was it. There were no creative differences of any sort. I came up with the idea of placing the band in this barn and creating this kind of dark mood, making it a sepia tone with some farm animals around them, building up towards the end where there's this kind of rebirth character. I had this idea of this kind of rebirth. I thought that there was this dark mood around this barn and there were animals there. I just felt that all of a sudden towards the end, that this reaper, this guy in this cage, is kind of walking by and could look pretty cool. And that could be the person with the eyes sewn shut. He's kind of taking care of animals, but he's blind. The thing about working with young bands in terms of like, it's their first or second video is, if they like your idea, they trust you. And I really felt trusted and supported. I was watching Layne's close-up take and I was like, wow, I knew that was a winner. There was something about that shot where you could tell his eyes and the emotion in which he was singing the song just connected. End quote. Now, as mentioned, the video for Man in the Box was a big hit on MTV. As a matter of fact, it was such a big hit that some people argue it was Man in the Box, not Smells Like Teen Spirit, which brought grunge to the mainstream. Although Smells Like Teen Spirit is the bigger of the two songs, it wouldn't be released as a single until September of 1991, well after Man in the Box was released as a single in January of 91. The following is a clip from one of my interviews with Twisted Sister's founder and lead guitarist JJ French. In this clip, JJ talks about the impact the video for Man in the Box had on MTV and how it signaled the beginning and the end of the hair metal era. If you'd like to see my full interview with JJ, it's linked below.
MTV changed dramatically. So a friend of mine was an executive at MTV. The turning point was a video called Man in the Box by Alice in Chains. It totally shifted their focus away from, quote, hair bands that had dominated MTV and made Twisted Sister, or we made them. But, that was 84 for us. So here we are in 91. So I had a good run, 6 years, 7 years, and then Man in the Box comes out, and they look at it, and they had a choice to add Man in the Box or a video by a group called Thunder that was your typical prototypical heavy metal band, hair that did all the things that hair is supposed to do and all this shit. And they were on Geffen, and that was the next hyped band coming, and they looked at Thunder and they looked at Man in the Box, so Alice in Chains and went, we're taking that. And that was a road less traveled, and it wiped out the dinosaur, which was the hair metal bands. And it kind of ended. The only band that leapfrogged and saved themselves was Guns N' Roses.
Now, there is a bit of irony in the fact that Alice in Chains' big hit in '91, Man in the Box, contributed to the death of glam metal's mainstream dominance. Despite the notion that all the grunge bands hated glam metal, in reality, many of the prominent grunge artists of the 90s loved 80s glam and hard rock, including Layne Staley. Layne growing up was a big fan of glam metal. Some of his favorite bands included Motley Crue, Quiet Riot, Twisted Sister, and Van Halen. As a matter of fact, according to Layne Staley's stepfather Jim Elmer, Van Halen in particular played a critical role in Layne wanting to become a musician. More on that later. At the time the Man in the Box video came out in 1991, Sammy Hagar was the singer in Van Halen. Sammy Hagar liked the video for Man in the Box so much that he subsequently invited Alice in Chains to go on tour with Van Halen that year. The following is from Sammy Hagar. Quote, "I loved that song, Man in the Box. I said, let's get these guys to open for us. I played the video for everybody to see what they look like. Look at these guys, they're cool. Everybody said, yeah. And that's how they came out." End quote. On June 17, 1991, Van Halen released their 9th studio record for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Alice in Chains toured with Van Halen in support of that album. Although touring with Van Halen was a dream come true for the guys in Alice in Chains, the tour did not go smoothly. As a matter of fact, things were pretty rough. Jerry Cantrell even went as far as calling the opening show for Van Halen the worst gig of his life. Quote, "I remember showing up for the first gig and walking on the deck and getting ready to play the show. Eddie Van Halen was sitting there with his guitar on, running scales, and he's smiling. He came over and introduced himself. He was hanging right on the side of the stage in my little pit with my guitars and my guitar tech. Eddie's wife Valerie was with him. Wolfie was newly born and in her arms. So that's how the tour started for me, like, whoa, okay, I'm standing here and Eddie Van Halen is smiling and playing guitar and meeting me, and I'm going to go on stage in about 5 minutes. I go on to play, and he stayed there and watched me. I think it was the worst gig in my life, at least in my mind, because I was so nervous that the dude was sitting there watching me. Finally, he went back to his dressing room to get ready for his show, and I think I started to relax a little bit more. We stayed with Van Halen for a couple of legs of the tour and made really good friends with Eddie. There were a lot of late night hangs, a lot of pool halls and bars. We'd always end up in each other's rooms with a couple of guitars. When he came to town, he'd give me a call and vice versa. We also became friends with Sammy. He and I have been buds for a long time. In our band, Van Halen was always well loved and embedded in our psyches. And of course, as a guitar player, Eddie is the top of the mountain in terms of uniqueness and a commitment to excellence. There was nobody like him, and there never will be. That's just the way it's supposed to be. Now, that tour was really impactful from a career standpoint and also just an achievement level of like, wow, okay, I guess we can play with these guys. End quote. Though things worked out in the end, the tour started off rough for Alice in Chains. The main reason for this, though, was not because they were nervous, but rather because Van Halen's audience did not like Alice in Chains, at least initially. Though many people had heard Man in the Box, their big single at the time, most of Alice in Chains' other songs at the time were not very well known. For the tour with Van Halen, Alice in Chains kept Man in the Box as their closing number in their set. This meant that the other songs they opened with were virtually unknown amongst Van Halen fans. Many Van Halen fans didn't even know Alice in Chains was the band behind Man in the Box. According to Sammy Hagar, at some shows, Van Halen fans would even flip off and boo the band. He also recalls that Layne in particular would give back attitude to the crowd. Sammy Hagar once recalled the following to Ultimate Classic Rock. Quote, "Layne would squat and take his leather jacket off real calm while Jerry was soloing. He'd fold it up like a butler and lay it down real slow on the drum riser, and then he'd turn around. He'd squat down like he's taking a dump and just take his middle finger and hold it up to the audience." I thought it was hilarious. He really, really had some balls, and he sang great every night. That band was great. But the point is, I said, open with Man in the Box, you idiots. That song is a hit. The audience will go, oh, that's who these guys are. You know, nobody knew who they really were. End quote. Eventually, Alice in Chains moved Man in the Box further towards the beginning of their set. And according to Sammy Hagar, it helped immensely. In an interview with Jenny McCarthy, Sammy Hagar went further into his reasoning as to why he recruited Alice in Chains to tour with Van Halen in 1991. Quote, "When you're in Van Halen in the 90s when grunge came along, that was freaky, man. because I'm looking at these guys and we're sort of the glam rock. We're all dressed up and dressing like girls and stuff. Motley Crue and Poison and these guys. But when grunge came and they were like down and dirty and funky, they made me nervous. I thought, these guys are going to disrespect us. Like, yeah, you're done, buddy. I was so insecure about it that I invited Alice in Chains with their first album when they had Man in the Box to open for Van Halen. They came out on the tour with us, and I've been dear friends with Jerry Cantrell since then. But that's how insecure I was. I said, let's get them on the show. That way their fans will know we're cool. It came out of fear a little bit. Not bad fear, but nervousness. They did really good, and business was good, and I made a friend out of it. Jerry comes to Cabo for my birthday bash every freaking year. End quote. On another occasion, Sammy Hagar once said the following to the Seattle Post as to his rationale for bringing Alice in Chains on tour with Van Halen. Quote, I said, let's find a cool new band that needs exposure. I was watching MTV and saw Man in the Box's video. Layne Staley is one of the greatest new singers today. End quote. Now, as mentioned earlier, Jim Elmer, Layne Staley's stepfather, once stated that Van Halen played a critical role in Layne wanting to become a musician. What Jim Elmer is referring to is a Van Halen concert he brought Layne to when Layne was a kid. The following is from Jim Elmer. This is from Alice in Chains' The Untold Story. Quote, that concert was where he really started to like music, I think. We were down in the general seating area, without any seats, so we were down in that mosh pit area. So when things started, I got off to the side. The two neighbor boys who came and Layne were about the same age, and they stayed down there. I stayed down there with them for just a little bit, and even in those days, I was the oldest person down there. Some girl came up with her boyfriend and said, you're really great for being down here. I took that as a compliment, because it was action-packed. It was a great concert. I think they stayed down there for the whole thing. End quote. It wasn't just Layne Staley who grew up an admirer of Van Halen, however. All of the guys in Alice in Chains were fans of Van Halen. When it came to Mike Starr in particular, he even wrote in his senior high school yearbook that one of his dreams was to tour with Van Halen. Well, now that dream had become a reality and Mike was elated. According to his friend Ken Kramer, Mike once called him and said the following, quote, dude, I can't talk very long. I have this girl's cell phone and I'm in the bathroom. We're about to open for Van Halen. Man, I love you so much. I wanted to call you. I want you to be here. This is so great. I wanted to share it with you. I'm going to try and call everybody I know. End quote. The Van Halen tour was a big moment for Alice in Chains, and in a way brought things full circle for the band. Unfortunately, it's also believed that it was during this tour when Layne Staley started dabbling with heroin. Now, before I go any further, something needs to be made clear. Though Layne is believed to have started using heroin during the tour, it doesn't mean he started using heroin because of the tour. This is an important distinction to make because Layne's heroin use and the Van Halen tour may have been coincidental. Van Halen may have had nothing at all to do with heroin entering Layne's life. As a matter of fact, no source that I have looked into has ever said that Van Halen got Layne involved with heroin. So, how exactly did heroin enter Layne's life? To this day, there is no definitive answer. No one definitively knows. However, the person that is often pointed to as the person who introduced Layne to heroin is Demery Perot, Layne Staley's longtime on-again, off-again girlfriend. Now, to be fair, there are those who have defended Demery and have said that she did not introduce Layne to heroin, but rather that it was Layne who introduced her to heroin. Though there is no 100% consensus, most people who have spoken on the topic publicly have said it was Demery who introduced Layne to the drug. Regardless of who introduced who, another big question is when. When did Layne start using heroin? According to Johnny Bacolis, a close friend of Layne's, Layne Staley told him that he started using heroin during the Van Halen tour. The following is from Alice in Chains' The Untold Story. Quote, Bacolis asked Layne how his heroin use began. He recalls Layne telling him they ran out of cocaine and Demery went out looking for more, but instead came back with heroin. This, Bacolis says, is his best recollection of when and how Layne first tried heroin, as told to him by Layne himself. Regarding Demery's use, Bacolis said, I think she was using at that point on and off. I don't know how seriously she was using, but she was using enough to take it when someone gave it to her. End quote. If this story is true, and if Layne did start using heroin during the Van Halen tour, That would mean the story Johnny Bacolis is telling about Demery getting Layne heroin must have happened at some point between August of 91 to January of 92, the period of time Alice in Chains was touring with Van Halen. Dave Jordan, the man who produced Alice in Chains' first two records, Facelift and Dirt, has said that Layne was not using heroin during the making of Facelift, which was recorded from various points between December of 89 and April of 1990. Dirt, which was recorded between April to July of 92, well after the Van Halen tour, was a different story. Dave Jordan once recalled the following to journalist David DeSola, quote, "I went to Arizona and saw them play with Van Halen. Layne was definitely acting different at that point. Layne did coke, and he drank a lot, so I didn't know if he was drunk or whatever, but he wasn't the same. Layne was usually gregarious and cracking jokes all the time. I went to their tour bus before the concert, and Layne was really quiet. I didn't know what was up with him. He is the only one, besides Mike Starr later, of course, to try heroin. Jerry never did heroin, neither did Sean." End quote. Interestingly, when it comes to Mike Starr, one of the people who has accused Demery Pearl of introducing Layne to heroin is John Starr, Mike's father. Like Layne, Mike also had struggles with heroin. John Starr once said the following, quote, "The drugs came as a result of Layne's connection with Demery. They did no drugs until they started touring. I loved her. Her and I got along great. Mike and Layne and her had more fun than everybody else on tour together. But she introduced Layne to heroin. Layne introduced Mike to heroin." End quote. For her part, Demery's mother Kathleen once said the following, quote, "People who love Demery blame Layne for her addiction. That's what people do when you love somebody and they're hanging with somebody else and they're doing bad things. You don't blame that person. You say, oh, it's their friends. Oh, he's running with a bad group of people." End quote. Regardless of who introduced who, both Demery and Layne died heroin-related deaths. Layne on April 5, 2002, and Demery 5.5 years later on October 29, 1996. 1996 was an important year for Alice in Chains in that it marked the band's last ever performance with Layne Staley. As a matter of fact, the last song the band ever played with Layne was Man in the Box. The final Alice in Chains show with Layne Staley took place on July 3, 1996 in Kansas City as an opening act on the Kiss reunion tour. The band unfortunately would never play again with Layne as his heroin addiction was getting worse and worse. Reflecting on the situation, Alice in Chains drummer Sean Kinney once said the following, quote, "Me and Jerry especially wanted to do the Kiss tour. I was in the Kiss Army and they were bringing back the original lineup. Layne kept saying, I don't want to do it, so we gave up on it. We didn't hear about it for a while. They must have asked again and he said, I'll do it. Those ended up being the last shows we played in public. They went great. They were fun. It was nice being out there. It was only 5 or 6 shows, and by the end of the shows, the last one, it was cops, ambulance, and get on the plane, hide the drugs. The same stuff was going on. It became more apparent that unless things seriously change, we can't go out and play to our potential at this level. We can't even get through a week and a half without drama and scary stuff going on. That's about right when I started mentally preparing like, it's done. Same thing with MTV Unplugged. They kept asking if we'd do it. Up to the moment, it was just a nail-biter. Barely any rehearsing at all. Guys not showing up, the same stuff. Rolled out there and everything thankfully worked. Right then is when I knew, okay, if we never do anything again, I'm good with this. I'd rather leave on a high point instead of throwing drug paraphernalia into a garbage can in an airport, hoping to not get arrested while I jump on a plane. That's when I started to distance myself from it and just preparing for the worst, which it eventually happened. End quote. Now, earlier I read a quote from Layne Staley's mother, Nancy McCallum, where she says that in her opinion, Layne Staley was the man in the box. Unfortunately, during the later years of his life, he quite literally became the man in the box. What I mean by that is, during the last few years of Layne Staley's life, he essentially locked himself away in his apartment and almost never came out. He became the man in the box. I want to read to you now a few quotes from Layne Staley's mother regarding his death and addiction. These are various quotes from Nancy McCallum from over the years. Quote, "If you've ever loved an addict that relapses, you trust your love for them, but you never trust the power of that drug on their brain chemistry. You never trust the treatment center if they don't address relapse. I once asked a treatment center counselor on family day, what about relapse? What have patients been taught about it? And as a family, what should we do? The counselor looked at me and said, oh, our students never relapse. I knew that we had wasted our time and money. My heart just sank. I felt so horrible for Layne because here I was, his logical, practical, upfront mom who had asked the question that nobody wanted to ask. I felt as though with all the parents, loved ones, and families surrounding these young people, they would give us a number or a counselor we could call in case we were worried. I was so blind and naive. In a way, it was like the drug had a spokesperson right there in that room. And it was the counselor. It was sickening. When Layne went to Hazelden Treatment Center, had he stayed longer and been able to build long-term friendships and sponsors, I believe Layne would have had a chance. Kurt Cobain said it would take 3 years for him to have a solid new start, and I believe he was correct. But Layne became addicted to drugs when he was quite young, and he never really learned mature problem solving. He just didn't have the wisdom you get over a period of years. Some of the people around Layne were wonderful, sweet-hearted, and professional, and truly had his interests at heart. A young person who is drug addicted can't help bumping up against sleazy people in the entertainment industry. Not necessarily the professionals, but others down the line. You can't stay clean and sober without clean and sober people around you, without a bodyguard mentality. Layne would have had to have been superhuman. Nobody expected him to be that. It takes walking away for a long period of time with the support of the music industry, i.e., had he stayed at Hazelden. Layne told me, Mom, I have a contract to fulfill. There are over 40 people on the payroll, and they all count on me being out there. That's where he was coming from, that he had a responsibility to the contract and his people. We need a humane society for musicians. The murderous conditions of the partnership between the drug community and the entertainment industry, anyone that supports it at any level is part of every drug death. It starts with the guy at the top who's making how many millions of dollars importing it and getting it into the country. I'd like that guy to sit across knee to knee with Layne and explain to him his rationale. I would say that Layne's form of addiction was aggressive. If it was a cancer, you sure wouldn't say, well, you've got 2 more albums to complete. All these people are on your payroll. I use this analogy. Some people try recreational drugs and it acts as a single unbarred hook. It's in, it slips out, and they walk away. Some people try recreational drugs and they get hooked. It's a single hook with a barb. They're still able to slip free. Some people get hooked with a double barbed hook, and over time, it does tremendous damage. Some people get hooked with a triple barbed hook, and there is not flipping that thing free. And the longer it's in there, without some outside help to extricate it, the more inevitable and severe the damage is. That fish is going to die. Every disease is like that. Some people get cancer. They discover it early, the treatment works, and it's rather non-invasive. Depending on the degree of the cancer and the kind of cancer, sometimes it's treatable. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it goes into remission. Sometimes it spreads to other parts of the body. Drug addiction comes in all different degrees, and in Layne's case, it was a death grip. He needed to be cut loose from his financial responsibilities in order to get the help he required, and it needed to be mandated. Because of the way the laws are written, you can intervene with a meeting, but you can't make an addict get help. That law was written so that someone's estate can't be appropriated unless you can prove that they can't tend their business. It's almost impossible to probe because there are all degrees of sanity, and some of it borders on insanity. What kept us from helping Layne was the same law that protected his estate. Sadly, one is a human life being treated the same as accumulated goods. These cases need to be handled on an individual basis. We were not able to help our son. When you're using drugs, you're not an adult making adult decisions. The drug is thinking for you. Its fangs are a death grip. I didn't believe that I would be doing much good poking away at him. Layne, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. I was trying to stay really close in my thoughts and conversations with him. I didn't want Layne to ever feel ashamed. All of us know that there are miracles around recovery. In Alaska, I was attending 12-step meetings at an A1 Anon for the family, friends, employers, employees, and concerned others of alcoholics and addicts. I was learning a lot. I probably read 200 books on the effects and studies of alcohol, addiction, and families. I was trying to discover the key. I wanted to be a voice for the one little phrase that might be the aha for Layne. If it wasn't me, I wanted somebody to find those magic words that would bring Layne back to himself. I never lost hope that I or someone would be able to do that. I educated myself about the disease so I could talk with Layne and understand. But a non-addict can never understand. They can only accept and believe that the addict is telling the truth. An addict and a non-addict don't think the same. Their brains are wired completely differently. Only an addict can help another addict through recovery. Layne's ex-girlfriend Demry, her mother and I take solace in knowing that our children experience great love from one another and that they are no longer suffering. In order for Layne to have lived, he should have been released from his contract with great love, acceptance, and respect. And yes, there was a contract, and yes, there was a commitment. But I don't think that a person has to... He didn't sign up to go to Iraq, for goodness sake. He signed up for fun and hard work, and he gave his heart and soul and life. At some point, it was real obvious that he couldn't go on, and that he needed freedom from the commitments. Maybe, after several years of true recovery, not just cleaning up, going back out, cleaning up, going back out, maybe the band could have done what the band is doing now, with Layne still at the helm. If you're in a situation where everything you do is under the microscope, everything about your life is being planned and managed by somebody else, and that life includes dealers putting free drugs in your pocket to keep you coming back, it's hell on earth. Then people watch and wait for you to die because they're going to sell all that stuff they stole out of your storage unit. They're going to see to it that it gets to an auction house specializing in sports and rock memorabilia where it gets sold. Then your parents are going to have to buy it back with your hard-earned money. It's very disgusting, that tangled web that they weave. Maybe a person that's involved in that whole web of destruction thinks it's a funny, challenging game. I'd like for that person to have to sit down and talk to my son. I think Layne knew he was dying, but he didn't plan on it. He had just gotten his driver's license renewed and he was in the middle of arts projects. I really expected that Layne would survive this ordeal. Nobody should die like that. I wish the dealers could have seen what I saw, and truly, may they be punished. Lots of fans and family members try to reassure me. People try to find the right words to say, the right thing to console and make us feel better. It's kind, and it's the right thing to do. They say things like, now he's in heaven singing in God's choir. You still have his music to listen to, or he'll live on through his music and we'll always hear his voice. I would want young people to understand that you don't have to accomplish anything huge to be loved. If Layne had chosen any other career, I couldn't have loved him more. People say, well, you have your daughters to console you. I say, you don't understand. My daughters lost their brother. It's just as profound for them, but a different loss, and I have to be there for them. When you strip away all of that, what you have left is loving someone, and Layne knew that. He once wrote on an anniversary card to us, all we need is love. This should never have happened. Layne was sacrificed. No one should be sacrificed. We should all live long, happy lives. A goal for all of us is to try and make the world a better place. When all is said and done, and all the platitudes are stripped away, and all the condolences and the gifts and the cards and everyone shares their thoughts, my child has died. I think the most important thing to remember is that no human being should be seen or treated as a commodity. People should remember him in their own way. He's a human being first. He may have represented other things, but he is a real person who needed to live and wanted to live and should never, never have suffered this horrible death. How should Layne be remembered? He didn't want to be remembered as a drug addict. He wanted to be remembered for what he created and gave to the world. Sadly, the addiction took him too soon, or he would have been able to share more of himself with us. But for me, I feel as though I'm attached to Layne, and that he's with me at every minute. How I would want others to remember him, I can't say. But I do know how I remember him, and that is every moment. This is where Layne Staley died on April 5th, 2002. Before I continue, I want to mention that this location is public domain information. There are several print sources, online articles, photos, and videos which list the address of this building. But regardless, I won't be listing the address in this video out of respect for the privacy of those living here. And I made sure not to use any shots of the building where anyone living here is visible. Layne Staley used to live here. His condo is this unit at the top corner. I want to read to you a quote from Layne Staley's mother where she describes the moment she first saw Layne Staley's body in the condo. I'll be going into detail about exactly what happened, but first, I want to start off with this quote because I find that this quote really shows the human tragedy in this all. Sometimes when it comes to famous people, it's easy to forget their humanity and to forget that the families of famous people are affected by death. Here's the quote from Layne's mother, Nancy McCallum. The police first went into Layne's condo, and then they said, I said, well, I need to go in and be with him. And they said, oh, I wouldn't do that. And I said, I can do this. I've always promised myself that if anything happened to my children, I would be there for them. And I went in and he was tiny, and I thought at first that he had made like a life-size mannequin of himself because he had lots and lots of art projects always. And I thought, somebody could have thrown that little guy over their shoulder and walked down the street and nobody would have even known that it was a real person. I sat with him for a few minutes, and I told him that I was really sorry how things had turned out, because, of course, we tried to not pressure him. We always felt like pressure would just push him to the wrong place, and he knew what he had to do. He had to go in treatment, stay in treatment, communicate with his sponsor, stay with healthy people, but the music industry doesn't afford you the time to do that. And those aren't healthy people. A lot of them are not. It was pretty tough to get cleaned up. By then, he had pretty much been secluded. So it was shocking to see my child like that. It should have turned out better. And it's been amazing how many people have expressed their love and support. Layne Staley had struggled with drug addiction for many years, and after Layne's body was examined, the official autopsy and toxicology report stated that he died from an accidental speedball overdose. A speedball is a mix of heroin and cocaine. Layne Staley weighed only 86 pounds at the time of his death, and if you factor in that he was around 6 feet tall, it really paints a dark image of how severe the drugs impacted him. In response to his death, the surviving members of Alice in Chains released the following statement. It's good to be with friends and family as we struggle to deal with this immense loss, and try to celebrate his immense life. We are looking for all the usual things: comfort, purpose, answers, something to hold on to, a way to let him go in peace. Mostly, we are feeling heartbroken over the death of our beautiful friend. He was a sweet man with a keen sense of humor and a deep sense of humanity. He was an amazing musician, an inspiration, and a comfort to so many. He made great music and gifted it to the world. We are proud to have known him, to be his friend, and to create music with him. For the past decade, Layne struggled greatly. We can only hope that he has at last found some peace. We love you, Layne, dearly, and we will miss you endlessly. One of the most tragic things about Layne's death is that he was actually dead for 2 weeks before people knew he had died. On April 17, 2002, Layne's mother, Nancy McCallum, had gone to Layne's condo, though she wasn't able to get inside. More on that shortly. She went to Layne's condo in order to let him know about the passing of Demry Parrot's brother, Demry Parrot being Layne Staley's ex-fiancé. On October 29, 1996, Demry Parrot died of a drug overdose herself. Layne had already been struggling from drug addiction for several years at this point, but the death of his fiancée only made things worse for him. In 2002, the year that Layne died, Mark Lanigan from the Screaming Trees told Rolling Stone magazine that Layne Staley, quote, never recovered from Demry's death, end quote. Layne Staley purchased this condo in April of 1997, 5 years before his death. During those last 5 years of his life, Layne became more and more reclusive, rarely leaving his condo. Alice in Chains drummer Sean Kinney recalls the following. It got to a point where he kept himself so locked up, both physically and emotionally. I kept trying to make contact. 3 times a week, like clockwork, I'd call him, but he'd never answer. Every time I was in the area, I was up in front of his place yelling for him. Even if you could get inside his building, he wasn't going to open the door. You'd phone and he wouldn't answer. You couldn't just kick the door in and grab him, though there were so many times I thought about doing that. The last time Layne recorded with Alice in Chains was in October of 1998, when the band recorded Get Born Again and Died, both of which were released in '99 as part of the Music Bank box set. Shortly after, in November of '98, Layne Staley recorded vocals for a band called Class of '99, a short-lived supergroup which also featured Stephen Perkins from Jane's Addiction, Martin Lenoble from Porno for Pyros, Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, and Matt Serletic, who's worked with Collective Soul, Cher, and others. The band recorded a cover of Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, which, as of the time of this recording, is the last known studio recording to feature Layne Staley on vocals. One of Layne Staley's friends has said that Layne was actually going to audition for Audioslave in 2001, but Tom Morello has since stated this is not true. In any case, with the exception of one radio interview Layne Staley took part in on July 19, 1999, with the rest of the guys from Alice in Chains, Layne Staley essentially disappeared from the public eye. Layne Staley's mother Nancy has said that she and Layne's family would occasionally see him from time to time. The last time Layne's mother saw him was around Valentine's Day in 2002, about 2 months before his death. Now, going back to April 17, 2002. That day, Nancy McCallum went to Layne Staley's condo in order to tell him about the death of Demry Parrot's brother, but there was no answer. 2 days later, on April 19th, Nancy McCallum got a call from Susan Silver, one of the people who managed Alice in Chains. Susan Silver informed Nancy McCallum that Layne's accountants had said no money had been withdrawn from Layne's bank account in 2 weeks. Nancy went back to the condo that day to check on Layne, but again, as was the case 2 days before, there was no answer. This is when Nancy McCallum called 911. Nancy, the police, and Jim Elmer, Layne's father, were all at the scene for this tragic day. The autopsy confirmed that Layne Staley had died 2 weeks earlier on April 5, 2002. By the time his body was found on April 19th, it had already partially decomposed. The last person to see Layne Staley alive was his friend and former Alice in Chains bandmate Mike Starr. In an interview on VH1's Celebrity Rehab, which took place in 2010, Mike Starr stated that he had spent time with Layne Staley the day before he died, which would have been April 4th. April 4th being Mike Starr's birthday. According to Mike Starr, Layne was very ill and Mike wanted to call 911, but Layne protested. Furthermore, according to Mike Starr, Layne even threatened to end their friendship if he had called 911. The two got into an argument and Mike Starr eventually stormed out of Layne's condo. Layne actually called Mike after he left and said, quote, "Not like this, don't leave like this," end quote. Layne died the following day, and Mike Starr has said that he regrets not calling 911. Layne's mother Nancy was present during the VH1 interview with Mike Starr and told him that it's not his fault that Layne died, and that no one in their family holds him accountable for Layne's death. Tragically, Mike Starr himself died on March 8, 2011 from a prescription drug overdose. The tragedy of Mike Starr's and Layne Staley's deaths are still felt by many today. With specific regards to Layne, up to this point in time I've done interviews with two people who've worked in studio with Alice in Chains, Jonathan Plum and Paul Fig. Here are two clips from those interviews where they discuss Layne Staley's death.
Obviously, one of the biggest tragedies in grunge music and rock and roll in general was the passing of Layne Staley. When you heard that news, were you surprised by it, or how was your reaction to that news?
Well, I mean, that unfortunately, that's happened way too many times here at London Bridge. I mean, to go through the list, Andrew Wood, Layne Staley, Shannon Hoon, Chris Cornell, it's kind of hard to talk about because it's so much of our history. It's a lot of my history, and these folks were just so brilliant, and I guess I look at it like we wouldn't have that music had they not been suffering what they were suffering with, that led them to do what they did, whatever it was their decision or their lifestyle, whatever it was that brought them to an end. Their music represented that struggle, and that we all feel that. When we listen to that music, we feel their struggle. We have those same struggles, so they, in some ways, I just feel like, they kind of struggled for us in a way and put those emotions, on record for us to hear and know that we're not alone. So I just think that's really profound, and it still lives on. I think it's still, I love seeing new generation kids in their 16, 17-year-olds identifying with Alice in Chains, that are now 20. It's not their genre or age, but they're hearing something in that music that's meaningful, because it is meaningful, because that band and those people were struggling with life, just like we all struggle with life. So sorry to circle back around to your question.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, Layne. We all knew Layne was not doing well at that point, so it didn't come to a surprise. It didn't come to us in Seattle as a surprise. I think it was sad. We all were disappointed that it was heading that way already. So I guess it wasn't a surprise. It's I was heartbroken then, and I'm still heartbroken. But I love that he put that music down for us. He left us a huge gift.
Do you remember what your last interaction was with Layne?
It was so long ago. I mean, so probably my last interaction with Layne was here doing, well, I guess it probably would have been, my most strong memory was doing Jar of Flies, and unfortunately I can't remember which song it was, but it was that Distorted story where he was singing on the mic and it was distorted and clipping, and Toby was just like, that's it, we're keeping it. And I remember we asked Layne to re-sing something at one point, and Layne was just like, nope, I'm not doing it. You got your take. And he walked out of the room. It's like,
friggin' rock star.
That's Layne, man. And we went back, and it was like, no, that was the take. He knew. That's the way I'd like to remember Layne, yeah.
Is there any one Alice in Chains song in particular that has a special meaning for you?
Well, I'd say Jar of Flies in general, just because I was here for the whole thing. It's funny, when you work on it, you develop your own connection to each song. And I feel like I have my own unique experience of that record because I got to work on a lot of it. I was really young. It's kind of a foggy memory, but I don't know. Each of those songs, I guess I can remember little moments, the band being around, and I'm really thankful that I get to have, and not everyone in the world gets to, be in the room when an album like that's being made. So I feel really blessed to get to associate to that record in a really special way.
The first Alice in Chains record you worked on, Black Gives Way to Blue, was
also the first Alice in Chains record the band had worked on since Layne's passing. So, with that said, was there any sort of uncomfortable feeling for the band being in the studio without Layne?
That record, to me, I think, was their cathartic, release. They did that, the last song on the record, Black Kids Wait Blues, their goodbye, letter to Layne. And, if you listen to, the first song, All Secrets Known, that's kind of sets the tone for the whole thing. And it wasn't until everybody was, throughout the whole record, everyone was all gung-ho. They were really excited. Everything was sounding great. They were glad to be in the studio doing Alice in Chains again. Will comes in, he's fresh new energy, and, it was really fun. When we were tracking vocals for the song Black Kids Way to Blue, that's when things got really emotional. And, everybody had to kind of take a break and let things settle for a second, just thinking about it that day. It was really, everybody felt Layne on that song, particularly tracking it.
And I can imagine for William, that was his first go with Alice in Chains. Do you know, it must have been big shoes for him to fill. How did he feel personally, do you know?
Will is highly intelligent and seriously talented singer. His range is so, he can get way up there, and, he's got the power. He knew he had big shoes to fill. I wasn't talking with him a lot about it. It was like he'd come in and work with Nick on vocals. I'd be there for him if he had a guitar part, and, we, just trying to be there and support him, because he's the new guy. First it was, Mike Inez, and now he's not. It's Will. But, now he's still there, and he's still doing a great job. When I watch those guys live, it's pretty impressive. And some people are like, oh, he's trying to sound like Layne. And to me, he doesn't sound anything like Layne. It's like the polar opposite. He's got like a bright, almost wiry voice, and, he's a tall dude, and, but he's got the power.
I did see him once with Will, and I loved his voice personally, and I've always thought Jerry's voice sounds closer to Layne's than Will's personally, in my opinion.
Well, I think what you're hearing is Jerry's voice on the old records under Layne, and that never went away.
So actually, yeah, you're right.
You're hearing Jerry come through just more. He's stepping forward a little bit, and he's becoming a better singer. In that first record, he was actually all the way up until Black Kids Way to Blue, he was a serious smoker. Like, I'd get to the studio, we'd work, and he's got an ashtray right next to me, and he's just blowing smoke right into the back of my head, like all day long. And I'd have to, when I get home, take a shower before I went to bed, because, I smell like an ashtray. Devil Put Dinosaurs here, he switched over to the patch and like really cut back, and he could tell in his voice it was getting better, and he had more control.